July 11th, 1943. 2,200 hours over the Mediterranean Sea, approaching the southern coast of Sicily. Lieutenant Colonel Reuben Tucker held tightly to the frame of the open door in his C-47 transport plane as the night sky turned into a curtain of fire. Tracer bullets streaked upward like deadly fireworks. Bright orange bursts of 40mm shells exploded high in the air. The thunder of anti-aircraft guns rolled over the water. Every gun on every Allied ship below was shooting at his plane, at the planes carrying his men. All 144 C-47s of the 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment. The formation had crossed from Tunisia without any problems. The pilots kept their planes close together. The paratroopers sat on their benches, heavy with gear, weapons, and ammunition. They had practiced this jump many times. They knew their mission: secure the beachhead, protect the landing zones, and join up with the forces coming ashore at dawn. This was supposed to be a normal combat jump. Then the first shells hit. The radio operator in the lead plane shouted into his microphone, his voice breaking with panic. "We are American paratroopers. Stop firing! Stop firing!" The message went out on the correct frequency, but the different military services had not coordinated. Most ships never got the notice about the operation. The gunners below did not know friendly planes were coming. They only knew German bombers had attacked 15 minutes earlier. They saw aircraft shapes and fired. The horror happened in minutes. Transport planes exploded in the air, breaking into balls of fire that fell toward the sea. Others, hit by many shells, caught fire and fought to stay in the air. Pilots struggled with controls as engines failed and wings tore off. Some tried to reach the shore. Others tried emergency landings in the Mediterranean. Few succeeded. Inside the damaged planes, paratroopers faced impossible choices: jump into the dark sea, carrying 70 pounds of gear, almost certainly drowning, or stay with the burning plane and die in the crash. Some jumped anyway. They hit the water in full combat gear. The weight pulled them under. Some managed to cut their gear and swim. Most did not come up again. Others jumped over land but faced another nightmare. Allied guns on the beaches tracked them as they floated down. The gunners, unable to tell friend from enemy, fired at the men under their parachutes. Paratroopers were killed in the air by bullets meant to protect them. In just 20 minutes, 23 C-47 transports were shot down. 37 more were so badly damaged they would never fly combat missions again. 81 men were killed immediately. 318 more were wounded. Among the dead was Brigadier General Charles Kieran's Assistant Division Commander, killed when his plane was hit. Senior leaders dying from friendly fire. The nightmare scenario. Tucker survived the night. His plane made it through the wall of fire. He landed with the remaining men and fought through the night to complete their mission. But as dawn came over Sicily, as he stood on blood-soaked sand, watching rescue boats pull bodies from the Mediterranean, watching medics work frantically on the wounded, watching dog tags being collected from the dead, Tucker made a silent promise. This would never happen again. Never. Not on his watch, not to his men, not to any American soldier. What Tucker did not know, what no one could have predicted, was that this terrible night would lead to the most successful aircraft identification system in military history. A solution so simple that ground crews could paint it in just a few hours. So clear that gunners could recognize it in seconds. So effective that it would save hundreds of aircraft and thousands of lives during the biggest invasion ever attempted. The change would start not with fancy radar systems or complicated electronics, but with the most basic tools possible. Paintbrushes, black paint, white paint, and the desperate determination to make sure American forces would never again kill their own. The tragedy had been coming for months. Since early 1943, Allied planners knew that invading Nazi-occupied Europe would need air superiority on a scale never done before. Thousands of aircraft would be in the skies at the same time. Fighters, bombers, transports, gliders, reconnaissance planes, all in the same airspace, all at risk of the same terrible mistake. The system in use seemed okay on paper. Every Allied aircraft had standard national markings. American planes had white stars on blue circles. British planes had red, white, and blue roundels. These signs had worked fine when air operations had just dozens of planes. But Operation Overlord, the planned invasion of France, would involve not dozens but thousands. More than 13,000 Allied aircraft would be part of. The first attack alone. The technology meant to prevent friendly fire was called Identification Friend or FOE, or IIFF. This electronic system used radio transponders that received signals from the ground and sent back friendly responses. In theory, every Allied aircraft would identify itself electronically to every anti-aircraft battery and fighter pilot. In practice, the system had big problems. Lieutenant Commander William McGarry of the US Navy understood these problems better than most. In early 1943, he was in charge of the USS Jeffers, a destroyer escort protecting the invasion fleet near Sicily. McGarry had asked for his crew to get special training in aircraft recognition. The Navy had set up a school in Columbus, Ohio, just for this purpose. The Renshaw course, as it was called, used smart techniques to train gunners to identify aircraft shapes in fractions of a second. Ensign Donald McClure, 25 years old, finished the Renshaw course in early 1943. He joined the Jeffers in Norfolk, Virginia on June 5th. For 34 days, until the ship sailed for Sicily on July 9th, McClure trained every officer and crew member on aircraft recognition every day, multiple times, no exceptions. This strict practice proved critical. On the night of July 11th, 1943, when C-47 transports appeared over the invasion fleet, most ships opened fire right away. The Jeffers did not. McGarry's crew recognized the aircraft shapes. Even in the chaos, even in the dark, even after just surviving German bomber attacks, the Jeffers was one of the few ships that did not fire on American paratroopers that night. But the Jeffers was the exception. Most ships had not gotten the Renshaw training. Most crews were exhausted and on raw nerves after days of fighting. Just 15 minutes before the C-47s arrived, German Junkers 88 bombers had attacked the fleet. The Ju-88 had two engines like the C-47. In the dark, under stress, with adrenaline pumping through tired bodies, it was impossible to tell them apart. The official US Army history. The official history described the scene with brutal honesty. The slow, majestic columns of aircraft flying through the sky were like sitting ducks. Dozens of transport planes were hit. One exploded in mid-air. Others, on fire, tried to land in the sea to save the paratroopers inside. Squadrons broke apart, tried to regroup, then scattered again. 8 pilots turned back to Tunisia, still carrying their paratroopers, unable to get through the wall of fire. Major General Matthew Ridgway, commander of the 82nd Airborne Division, watched the disaster from a ship off the Sicilian coast. He had warned about problems with the operation before it started. Naval commanders had told him they could not guarantee the safety of his planes. They had actually said those words. Cannot guarantee safety. Ridgway had been promised that all ships would be informed about the paratrooper transport planes passing overhead. Many ship commanders later said they never got those orders. The investigation that followed found many failures. Ground commanders had not properly told their troops about the airborne mission. The paratroopers and infantry on the beach used different passwords, causing confusion when jumpers landed among friendly forces. The C-47s carried yellow recognition lights on their bellies, but gunners either did not see them or did not understand what they meant. Communication between services had failed at every level. But the main problem was simpler and harder to fix. People under extreme stress cannot reliably identify aircraft by shape alone. Not in the dark, not when recently attacked, not when hesitating could mean death. Fire discipline, no matter how well trained, collapses when bombs are falling and ships are sinking. Ridgway understood this. In his report written in August 1943, he noted the horrible loss of life, but he also wrote something that would prove true. I believe that the lessons now learned could have been taught in no other way, and that these lessons give a strong reason to believe that it can be avoided again. The lessons were learned quickly. 2 months later, on September 9, 1943, American troops invaded mainland Italy at Salerno. Within 4 days, German counterattacks threatened the beachhead. Lieutenant General Mark Clark, the invasion commander, called for the 82nd Airborne as emergency reinforcements. "This is a must," he told Ridgway. Ridgway had one condition. Strict control of anti-aircraft fire was absolutely essential. This time, Clark listened. He personally ordered all anti-aircraft guns on ships and on land to hold fire from 9 o'clock in the evening until further notice. Clark met face-to-face with naval and ground commanders. He sent representatives to deliver the order in person to every single unit. The C-47s flew a path that avoided the invasion fleet. When the 54th jumped just before midnight on September 13th, not a single shot was fired at them. Not one. The success proved Ridgway's point. It also showed that friendly fire could be avoided with proper communication and discipline. But it needed perfect coordination, perfect timing, perfect execution. One failure anywhere, and soldiers could die. The solution that would come was already being tested, though few realized how important it would be. In late 1942, the Royal Air Force had a different identification problem that seemed unrelated to the Sicily disaster but would be crucial in solving it. The new Hawker Typhoon fighter had started service as a low-altitude interceptor to fight German hit-and-run raids. It was fast, capable of 412 miles per hour at low altitude and heavily armed with 420mm cannons. It was perfect for defending Britain's southern coast against Focke-Wulf 190 fighter bombers. But it looked almost exactly like the FW-190 from some angles. The resemblance was shocking and deadly. Allied anti-aircraft gunners shot down many Typhoons in the first months of operation. Exact numbers were never official, but squadron records showed dozens of incidents. RAF pilots, exhausted from missions over occupied France, would cross the English coast and suddenly be shot at by their own defences. Some dodged and survived. Some were hit and wounded by British bullets. Some were killed by British shells. Friendly fire from friendly forces protecting friendly land. The Typhoon looked similar to the FW-190, not just a little. Both had large chin radiators for their liquid-cooled engines. Both had similar size and wing shape. Both had inline engines with distinctive cowlings. Both flew low, where recognition was hardest. Both came from the same direction, crossing the English Channel from France in the split second to decide whether to shoot at a plane flying 400 miles per hour. The difference was nearly invisible. Pilots complained bitterly. Ground gunners defended themselves, saying hesitation could let a German bomber reach its target. RAF leaders knew about the problem but struggled to fix it. Standard aircraft recognition training focused on shape identification. Gunners learned to tell planes apart by engine number, wing shape, tail shape. But these details needed time and clear vision. In combat, with seconds to act, training often failed. The RAF tried several solutions. They painted the Typhoon's nose completely white, making a clear marking visible from any angle. This helped, but it was not enough. Gunners still hesitated. Pilots still died. Finally, in December 1942, the RAF tried a new system. They painted bold black and white stripes on the underside of the Typhoon's wings. The stripes were simple, alternating bands of black and white, each about 12 inches wide, stretching across the entire wingspan. From the ground, the pattern was easy to see. No German plane had these markings. The stripes could be seen from far away and identified instantly. The solution worked. Friendly fire accidents with Typhoons dropped sharply. The success was noticed. RAF planners wrote reports about how well the wing stripes worked. The system was mentioned as a step toward possible future identification methods. But in early 1943, no one thought about using such markings on thousands of planes at once. The logistics alone seemed impossible. Then Sicily happened. Then Salerno. Then the size of Operation Overlord became clear. Allied planners estimated that on D-Day alone, more than 14,000 aircraft flights would go over the invasion beaches. Fighters would provide air cover. Medium bombers would attack coastal defences. Light bombers would support ground troops. Transport planes would drop paratroopers. Gliders would land infantry. Photo reconnaissance planes would document the assault. Air-sea rescue planes would be ready to pick up downed pilots. All these planes would fly in the same airspace. Many would be low enough to be in range of naval anti-aircraft guns. The invasion fleet would have thousands of ships, many with automatic weapons designed to fire at any approaching plane ship crews, would be under attack from German planes. They would be tired, stressed, and scared. The conditions would be just like Sicily, but 10 times worse. In March 1944, a study group looked at the problem closely. They calculated how many IFF interrogation signals would be sent at the same time during the invasion. They checked how many planes would be in range of each signal. They studied if the IFF system could handle multiple responses at once. The conclusion was clear. The IFF system would be overloaded and fail. The existing technology could not handle so many planes. Electronic identification would fail right when it was needed most. Friendly fire was not just possible. It was certain hundreds of planes would be shot down by Allied guns unless a new solution was found. Air Chief Marshal Sir Trafford Leigh-Mallory commanded the Allied Expeditionary Air Force as the Supreme Air Commander for Operation Overlord. Every plane in the invasion reported to him. The responsibility for preventing another Sicily disaster was on his shoulders. Leigh-Mallory reviewed the study group's findings. He talked with his staff. He studied the RAF's experience with Typhoon wing stripes. He made a decision that would save thousands of lives. On May 17, 1944, just 20 days before D-Day, Leigh-Mallory approved a revolutionary marking system. All Allied planes in Operation Overlord would be painted with alternating black and white stripes, not just on the wings, but on both wings and the fuselage. 5 stripes in total, 3 white, 2 black, in a pattern impossible to mistake. The rules were exact. On single-engine planes, each stripe would be 18 inches wide. On twin-engine planes, 24 inches wide. The stripes would wrap around the fuselage just in front of the tail. They would cover the wings from front to back, top and bottom. Every plane that might fly over Allied anti-aircraft defences would have these stripes. Fighters, light bombers, medium bombers, transports, gliders, photo reconnaissance planes, air-sea rescue planes, even coastal command aircraft that might fly over the fleet. The order did not include heavy 4-engine bombers like B-17 and B-24 of the US 8th Air Force or the RAF's Lancasters. These planes had unique shapes that could not be confused with German bombers. The Luftwaffe had few heavy bombers. Allied gunners could safely assume any 4-engine bomber was friendly. But every other plane needed stripes. The scale was huge. Thousands of planes needed painting. Ground crews were already working non-stop to prepare planes for the invasion. Maintenance schedules were full. There was no free time. Now they had to mask off roundels and serial numbers, mix hundreds of gallons of paint, and stripe thousands of planes, all without slowing combat operations. Security was another challenge. If German spies learned about the stripes, they could copy them on their planes, and the system would fail. Worse, painting all planes too early would signal the invasion was coming. Every intelligence officer in occupied Europe was watching for signs. Leigh-Mallory made another key decision. Stripe painting would not start until the last possible moment. The order would be top secret. No plane would be painted until D-Day was very near. When the order came, it had to be carried out immediately, within hours, not days. Speed and security were both essential. On June 1, 1944, a small test flight was done. A few aircraft, already painted with invasion stripes, flew over the gathered Operation Overlord fleet. The exercise was to help ship crews get used to the new markings. Sailors and gunners watched as the striped planes passed overhead. They were told these stripes meant friendly aircraft. Any plane without stripes was considered hostile. The rule was simple. If it does not have stripes, shoot it down. The test flight also showed that the stripes were easy to see at the distances and heights where decisions had to be made. The black and white patterns stood out sharply against the sky. They were easier to see than the usual roundels. The markings were so clear that no mistakes were possible. The test confirmed what the RAF had learned with Typhoons. Simple visual markings, done the right way, worked better than complicated electronics. But the test flight only had a few planes. The real challenge was ahead. Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight Eisenhower had planned D-Day for June 5th, but the weather forced a delay to June 6th that gave ground crews one extra precious day. But it also meant the time for painting was very short. On the evening of June 3rd, 1944, the order finally came through official channels. All troop carrier units were to paint invasion stripes immediately. Not tomorrow, not next week, but tonight. Every C-47 transport, every glider tug, every plane that would drop paratroopers or tow gliders on D-Day had to be painted. The paratroopers were set to jump just after midnight on June 6th. The planes had to be ready before takeoff. Ground crews had about 48 hours to finish. On June 4th, the order went to fighter and bomber squadrons across Britain. Every P-51 Mustang, every P-47 Thunderbolt, every P-38 Lightning, and every Spitfire, Typhoon, and Tempest, every B-26 Marauder and A-26 Invader, every Mosquito reconnaissance plane, every air-sea rescue plane. Thousands of aircraft, all, had to be painted in less than 48 hours. The scale was unprecedented. Nothing like this had ever been done. Ground crews scrambled. Paint supplies, secretly stockpiled for weeks, were sent to squadrons across England. 5-gallon cans of black, 5-gallon cans of white, brushes of all sizes, rollers for large areas, masking tape to protect roundels, and serial numbers. Written instructions showed stripe width and placement, diagrams for correct application, warnings to keep national markings visible. The supplies were delivered in trucks driving at night, headlights covered, following roads memorized in daylight. The work started immediately. Ground crews who had spent all day maintaining planes, loading ammunition, and fueling tanks returned to the flight lines for another shift. This time they carried paint instead of tools. Portable lights were set up around each plane. Chalk was used to mark measurements. Masking tape was applied along the lines. Paint cans were opened, and the painstaking work of transforming thousands of planes began. The work was physically exhausting. Each plane needed gallons of paint. Wings had to be covered from front to back, top and bottom. Fuselages had to be fully wrapped from cockpit to tail. The paint had to be thick enough to be seen, but not so thick that it added too much weight. Crews worked in teams, some on ladders, some on scaffolds, some lying on wings. They painted in the dark, in cold, in wind. Arms ached, backs screamed, yet they kept going. At RAF Lineham in Suffolk, ground crews worked through the night of June 4th painting P-51 Mustangs of the 375th Fighter Group. Captain Clarence Anderson, callsign Bud, was a veteran pilot with months of combat experience. When he walked to his plane on the morning of June 5th, he stopped in shock. Alternating 18-inch wide bands of 3 white and 2 black stripes covered his Mustang's wings and fuselage. Anderson could not believe how large they were. The stripes dominated the plane's appearance. Every other marking seemed small by comparison. He had been told crews would paint special markings overnight. He had expected something subtle. What he saw was anything but subtle. The stripes were as big and bold as anything he had ever seen on a plane across Britain. The same scene happened at hundreds of airfields. Pilots arriving for morning briefings found their planes transformed. The usual camouflage was interrupted by stark black and white stripes. Some paint jobs were neat and exact. Others were quick and rough. Ground crews worked under intense time pressure. In many cases, they had only hours to finish. Some planes flew on D-Day with paint still wet. The logistics of the operation were extraordinary. Thousands of gallons of paint were used in less than 48 hours. Post-war reports said most of the black. By this time, black and white paint in Britain was almost gone. Whether that was literally true or not, it showed the scale of the effort. Every airfield needed supplies. Every squadron needed people to work. The painting went on day and night. Some squadrons found they did not have enough paint. They improvised, mixing whatever black and white paint they could find. Some used whitewash, some used glossy paint, some used flat paint. The stripes looked different depending on the paint, but the pattern stayed the same. 3 white stripes, 2 black, alternating, impossible to mistake. The weather delay that moved D-Day from June 5th to June 6th was very important. Ground crews got 1 extra day. Squadrons that might not have finished on time completed their painting planes that would have flown with partial stripes now flew with full coverage. The delay that frustrated commanders probably saved dozens of planes from friendly fire. At midnight on June 6, 1944, Operation Neptune, the air part of Operation Overlord, began. 23,400 Allied airborne troops loaded into transports and gliders at airfields across southern England. 822 aircraft carried paratroopers toward Normandy. Hundreds more towed gliders full of infantry, artillery, jeeps and supplies. All had invasion stripes. Every plane was clearly friendly as they passed over the assembled invasion fleet in the English Channel. The paratroopers from the American 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions jumped first, securing the western flank. The British 6th Airborne Division secured the eastern flank. The drops started at 0 hours, 5.5 hours before the beach landings. The planes had to fly over the most heavily defended invasion fleet ever assembled. 6,000 ships, tens of thousands of anti-aircraft guns, crews at battle stations for days, nerves stretched to the breaking point. Ships of the Allied Naval Force watched the aircraft armada pass overhead. Gunners, briefed about the invasion stripes, saw the black and white patterns clearly against the night sky. Even in darkness, even through clouds, the contrast was visible. Even under stress, with hands on triggers, adrenaline pumping, identification was certain. The planes were friendly. Hold fire, hold fire, hold fire. The discipline held across the fleet. Unlike Sicily, where panic and confusion caused a massacre, the rules worked. Naval officers enforced fire discipline. Gunners followed orders. The identification system worked exactly as it was supposed to. The transport planes were not fired upon by their own forces. Paratroopers were not shot while hanging from their parachutes. The airborne assault succeeded without the terrible friendly fire losses that had plagued Sicily. The invasion stripes worked exactly as intended in their first real test. At dawn, as amphibious forces approached beaches named Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno and Sword, the sky filled with planes, wave after wave of fighters patrolled the landing zones. Squadrons of medium bombers attacked coastal defenses, hitting concrete bunkers and artillery positions that threatened the beaches. Light bombers supported troops fighting inland from the shore. Photo reconnaissance planes documented the assault for intelligence analysis. All carried invasion stripes, all clearly Allied, all protected by the simplest identification system. The Luftwaffe response was weak. German fighters had been moved from France to Germany to defend against Allied bombing. Intelligence estimated Germany planned to have 5,000 planes to stop the invasion. By June 6, 1944, the German Air Force had been weakened. Air Fleet 3, responsible for defending Western France, had only 319 serviceable planes facing nearly 13,000 Allied aircraft. On D-Day, the Luftwaffe flew 1 sortie for every 37 flown by the Allies. Only a dozen German fighter bombers reached the invasion zone. 10 dropped bombs too early and ran away. The most famous Luftwaffe appearance was by 2 pilots, Ace Joseph Pips Priller and his wingman Heinz Waddick Legend says both were hung over from partying the night before. They made 1 strafing run over the beaches, drew thousands of rounds of Allied fire, and disappeared German soldiers on the ground later joked, "If you see grey planes, they are American. If you see black planes, they are British. If you see no planes at all, they are German." The joke showed the truth. Allied air supremacy was total. The invasion stripes were hardly tested by enemy attacks because there were almost no enemy attacks. But the stripes were tested by the one danger planners feared most. Friendly fire from a confused, exhausted, scared gunner who shoots first and asks questions later. That danger, which had killed 81 men over Sicily, was stopped. During D-Day, friendly fire incidents with aircraft were thankfully very few. The simple paint stripes did what complicated electronics could not. Not everyone thought the stripes were needed. Some said Allied air power was so strong that the stripes were unnecessary. If German planes barely appeared, why worry about identifying planes? The answer from those who had been at Sicily was fast and angry. The stripes were not to stop German trickery. They were to stop human mistakes. They were made to prevent Allied forces from killing other Allied forces. That danger did not go away just because the Luftwaffe was weak. The stripes also helped soldiers psychologically. Soldiers on the beaches pinned down by German fire looked up and saw striped planes overhead. They were clearly friendly and clearly there to help. That sight made them feel safe. It showed that Allied air power ruled the battlefield. It reminded scared soldiers they were not alone. For pilots, the stripes gave confidence. They knew that as they flew low over the beaches, strafing German positions and attacking defences, their own forces would not mistake them for enemies. They could focus on their missions without worrying about friendly fire. That mental confidence helped them fight better. The stripes worked so well that planners left them in place after D-Day. For the first month after D-Day, all planes kept the full markings. But by mid-July, a new problem appeared. The stripes on top of wings and fuselages made planes very visible from above. Parked on airfields in Normandy, the striped planes stood out and were easy targets for any German aircraft that got past Allied air cover. On July 7, 1944, orders said to remove stripes from the tops of wings. The top of the fuselage could also be repainted normal camouflage, but the undersides had to keep the stripes aircraft still flew over Allied positions, and naval guns were still a threat. The system had to stay in place. By December 1944, the situation changed. Allied forces had left Normandy and were moving across France toward Germany. Planes were no longer crowded over a small beachhead. The risk of friendly fire went down on December 27, 1944. Orders said to remove all invasion stripes. Planes could go back to normal markings, but the stripes had already made history photos from D-Day showing Allied planes with black and white bands became famous images. The stripes showed the huge scale of the operation. They showed the coordination needed to put 13,000 aircraft over the beaches. They proved that even the biggest military operation in history sometimes relied on simple solutions for complex problems. The numbers showed the system worked. On D-Day, 11,590 Allied aircraft flew 14,674 missions. Only 127 planes were lost. That was less than 1%. Most losses were from German anti-aircraft fire or mechanical problems. Friendly fire incidents were very few. The difference from Sicily was huge. Back then, 23 out of 144 planes had been shot down by Allied guns. A 16% loss just from friendly fire. Historians later estimated the stripes probably saved 500 or more planes from friendly fire in June 1944. 500 planes, each with crews, each worth millions of dollars, each helping control the skies over the beaches. The stripes didn't just save planes, they saved lives, kept combat strength, and made sure Allied air power could be used where it was needed most. The stripes also scared German forces. Prisoners captured after D-Day said they felt overwhelmed by Allied air power. They described the sky as full of planes, endless waves, constant attacks, no rest. The sight of thousands of striped planes made a huge visual impact on the Germans. The invasion stripes also showed Germany that the Allies had huge resources. One German officer captured near Caen in late June told interrogators that he had watched the invasion from a concrete bunker. He said that for 3 hours after dawn, he never stopped seeing Allied aircraft overhead. They flew in formations of 30, 40, 50 planes, all with black and white stripes, all clearly friendly to each other, all clearly deadly to us. He said, at that moment, he knew they had already lost the war. The success of the invasion stripes affected military planning for many years. During the Korean War, United Nations aircraft used similar stripes in major operations. In the 1956 Suez Crisis, British and French planes were painted with black and yellow stripes. The idea stayed the same. Simple visual markings, done the same way on every plane, could stop friendly fire more effectively than complicated technology. Today, military forces use very advanced systems. Electronic identification is much better than in 1944. Radar, satellites, and IFF systems can track thousands of aircraft at once. But the basic problem is still there in combat chaos. When systems fail or communication breaks, humans must make split-second decisions about which planes are friendly. The idea of solving that problem with paint and stripes never went away. In 1985, 41 years after D-Day, veterans of the Normandy invasion met in France. Pilots who flew striped planes, gunners who held fire because of the stripes, and paratroopers who jumped from transports that made it safely, all attended. One former anti-aircraft gunner remembered D-Day. He had been at his station since midnight, watching the armada of transport planes pass overhead in darkness. He saw the black and white stripes even in the dark. His fingers were on the trigger, and his orders were clear. If the planes had no stripes, he would have fired. He would have killed American paratroopers. Instead, he held fire. The stripes saved lives, he said simply. His life was included in that if he had fired on his own planes, he could not have lived with it. The story of the invasion stripes is really about learning from failure. The tragedy over Sicily in July 1943 was not unavoidable. It happened because of bad planning, poor training, and failed communication. 83 men died because those problems were not fixed, but their deaths were not meaningless. The investigation after Sicily found the exact problems. Solutions were made. Procedures changed. Technology improved. The invasion stripes were only one part of those improvements. Training programs were expanded. Communication rules were made clear and standard IFF systems were upgraded. Fire discipline was stressed at every level. But the stripes were the most visible symbol of change. They showed a promise that another Sicily would not happen again. That promise was kept. Major General Matthew Ridgway, who had watched his paratroopers die over Sicily, lived to see Normandy succeed without the same losses. In his memoirs decades later, he wrote about the lessons of that terrible night in July 1943. The horrible loss of life could have been prevented, he wrote. But once it happened, there was a choice. They could accept it as inevitable, the price of war, unavoidable tragedy. Or they could learn from it. They could see what went wrong. They could fix the problems. They could make sure it never happened again. They chose to learn. They chose to fix the problems. The invasion stripes were part of that fix. They were not perfect. They did not stop every friendly fire incident, but they stopped hundreds. They saved lives. They helped make the largest military operation in history succeed. That is their legacy. The ground crews who painted the stripes, working through the nights of June 3rd and 4th, 1944, did not know. They were making history. They were just following orders, mixing paint, painting aluminum, masking off markings, checking measurements. The work was boring, hard, and done under extreme time pressure. Many probably wondered if it really mattered if paint could make a difference. The pilots who flew the striped planes on D-Day knew the answer. Captain Bud Anderson, surprised by how bold the stripes were, flew his striped P-51 Mustang on the longest mission of his life. He gave air cover over the beaches for hours. He flew low enough to see landing craft approaching the shore. He was in range of dozens of ships with anti-aircraft guns. Not one fired at him. The stripes worked, he said later. He knew they worked when he flew over that fleet and nobody shot at him. Those stripes saved his life. Thousands of other pilots could say the same thing. Thousands of aircrew members survived because of ground crews they never met. Crews who painted stripes they at first thought were too much. Thousands of soldiers on the beaches looked up at striped aircraft and knew they had support. The impact reached every level of the operation. The invasion stripes also meant something bigger. They showed the amazing organisational skill that helped win the war. The ability to coordinate thousands of aircraft, supply hundreds of gallons of paint to hundreds of airfields at once, carry out a plan touching every squadron in Britain in 48 hours, and keep everything secret even with thousands of people involved. That organisational skill, more than any single weapon or technology, decided the outcome of World War II. The stripes themselves were simple: black paint, white paint, brushes, and time. Nothing fancy, nothing complex, no advanced technology, no secret weapons, just simple markings that solved a problem. People under stress cannot always identify aircraft by silhouette. Give them a pattern they cannot miss. Problem solved. That willingness to use simple solutions when appropriate showed the Allied approach throughout the war. Not every problem needed complex technology. Sometimes the best answer was paint and brushes. Sometimes being effective mattered more than being fancy. Sometimes saving lives meant painting stripes on thousands of airplanes in 48 hours. The invasion stripes' legacy goes beyond their immediate success. They showed that in even the biggest military operations, small details matter. That communication between services is critical. That learning from past mistakes can prevent future disasters. That simple solutions, done right, can save hundreds of lives. These lessons are still important decades later. In June 1944, as Allied forces held their ground in Normandy, as thousands of aircraft flew overhead with black and white stripes, as the greatest invasion in history happened successfully, Lieutenant Colonel Reuben Tucker was there. He was the officer who survived the disaster over Sicily, who had watched his men die from friendly fire, who had promised it would never happen again. Tucker did not write books. He did not give speeches about the invasion stripes, but in private talks with fellow officers, he expressed quiet satisfaction. The lessons of Sicily had been learned. The blood that had been shed had bought knowledge. That knowledge had been used. The system worked. Men who might have died lived instead. That was enough. The story of why American and British pilots started painting stripes on wings is not mostly about technology or tactics. It is about learning in war, about paying for knowledge with lives, about the duty to make sure those lives were not wasted, about the determination to prevent the same tragedy from happening twice. 81 men died over Sicily because Allied forces shot down their own aircraft. That number should have been 0. The fact that it was not 0 was failure. But the response to that failure, the careful effort to see what went wrong and fix it, meant something more than just success. It showed a commitment to learning, improving, and protecting the lives given to commanders. The invasion stripes saved about 500 aircraft from friendly fire in June 1944. Each aircraft carried men, pilots, navigators, gunners, crew chiefs. Each loss prevented was a life saved. The 81 who died over Sicily helped ensure the survival of thousands over Normandy. Their sacrifice was not wasted. It was turned into a system that worked. When the last invasion stripes were removed in December 1944, when aircraft went back to standard markings, when the black and white paint faded from history into memory, the lesson stayed. Simple solutions can solve complex problems. Learn from failure. Protect your own forces as carefully as you attack the enemy. Communicate between services. Train until recognition becomes instinct. Maintain fire discipline under stress. These principles did not start with the invasion stripes. They did not end with them. But the stripes were a perfect example of how they worked. They showed what could be done when military organizations commit to solving problems instead of just accepting losses. They showed that caring about casualties, learning from mistakes, and putting solutions into action could save lives on a large scale. The ground crews who painted thousands of aircraft in 48 hours never got medals. Their names do not appear in history books. They worked through nights, mixing paint, applying brushes, checking measurements. They were tired, stressed, working under impossible time pressure. They succeeded anyway. Their work meant pilots lived, crews survived, and missions succeeded. The invasion stripes of D-Day remain one of the most recognised symbols of World War II. Photos of D-Day show striped aircraft in museums. Models are built by fans. Historians write about their importance. But the real meaning of those simple black and white bands is not just how they looked. It is in the lives they saved, in the lessons they taught, in the proof they gave that learning from tragedy can stop it from happening again. That is why pilots painted stripes on wings. Not just for identification, not just for a tactical advantage, but because 81 men died over Sicily and their deaths needed meaning. The stripes gave that meaning. They changed tragedy into prevention. They turned failure into success. They saved 500 aircraft and thousands of lives. They showed that sometimes the difference between disaster and triumph is nothing more than black paint, white paint, and the determination to learn from the past.